Okay, I think I am live now, so let's invite Dylan. Hello, this worked really quickly. Normally it takes forever to actually want to work. How are you doing?
Hello, sorry about that. Yeah, I'm good, and you?
Yeah, good. Well, a bit rushed off my feet. I just finished a reenactment display literally like 15 minutes ago.
Oh,
It's a full-on day, but very happy to be here. So thanks a
yes,
lot for joining.
yes, nice to meet you, and thank you for starting this talk. Yeah.
That's all right. You're the one that brings the expertise. So, honestly, thank you for lending us some of your time. I had a really good chat with our friends from SASA. If you guys are seeing this at some point, hello, who were super excited that you were
Oh,
also
yes.
coming on board. So it's really good because I've been working with them as well in a few things. So it's really nice, bringing a good community of researchers all across the world actually trying to put not just ancient studies but different aspects that are not so mainstream in terms of history and archaeology in
Oh, yes,
touch.
yes, I do.
Thanks so much for that. And well, I see that there is already some people watching, so let's just
Oh, yeah.
get things started. So hello everyone, thank you so much for joining us. I am here with Dylan today. And for those of you who don't know what we're doing here, this is actually our new episode on HistClub, which is just a general corner for experts from all over the world to come and talk about their specific field in the areas of archaeology, history, and anything in between in the humanities. And Dylan today is going to talk to us about something super cool that I actually had only found out about very recent about, and mostly just from actually knowing Dylan. Not much more than that, which is actually archeomusicology, just a
Yes.
mouthful. And in general, just the research of music in the ancient world and in archaeology in that general perspective. But enough of me talking about that. Dylan, could you please introduce yourself for anyone who may be watching now or later at home?
Okay, so I'm Dylan Lawrence Gibson. I'm busy with my PhD studies now, and yeah, I'm doing it in musicology, well, in archeomusicology as well. So that's the study of, well, musicology is the study of all things related to music. So that includes music theory, music history, the origins of music, and also music semantics. So the meaning behind music and all that. And the musicology is well, the archeo part is archaeology. So it's studying the ancient history and archaeological finds to inform us about ancient music practices. And well, just some general other background. I'm from South Africa, so I'm currently studying at Stellenbosch University through Africa Open Institute. And yeah, that's just for the brief introduction there.
That's a great intro. So just to get things, started and like I was saying, I only really found out that archeomusicology was a thing, very recently. I knew about musicology for a really long time because, well, everyone in my family is actually very much into music. So we all have studied some form of music or history of music at some point of our lives. But, how did you actually get into this? Like, you woke up one day and you were like, hey, yeah, I'm just gonna study archeomusicology. Like, was it first musicology and then you found your niche? Like, how did that happen? And hi
Yeah,
everyone that just joined.
it was first music. So I play guitar, so you can see my guitars in the background there. So I like my metal music, and I went to go study classical guitar. I also did music education, and then I started to get an interest in musicology. And then, well, I started doing ancient studies, so ancient culture studies as an elective, and that's when I became interested. Well, I started to connect the ancient music with the music with the ancient world, and I just started to do some of my own research, and then I started to come across um, well, the archaeomusicology, and it is a very obscure kind of topic. It's not a very big one. It's kind of still small. It's a relatively new field. It started sometime around the 1960s when they started to excavate cuneiform tablets that informed us about ancient music. And so there's been a lot of debate since 1960s. Well, that was when they realized it was related to music studies, or to ancient music. So yeah, it was first classical, and then into the ancient studies, and then I went into musicology a little bit more. Well, that was my specializing field, and then we also took up a philosophy, and then I also extended my assyriology a little bit, and that's how I just became interested in all of this, like
So
slowly
that's
but
how
surely.
you
Yeah.
that's how you make the journey. Okay. No, but it's important for people to know this, because I think sometimes we're so used to things like history or classics just being textbook direct routes, and people don't actually realize that it doesn't have to be a straightforward journey, and that a lot of the sort of lesser known disciplines are actually not that straightforward at all. It's a very sort of interdisciplinary, intersectional type of field. So thank you for sharing that experience, which may seem a bit daunting for people out there, but
Yes.
I mean, at the same time, I kind of feel that that's sort of part of the journey, particularly when you're doing research, like your PhD. You sort of just end up finding something within a field that is a bit more niche, and that becomes your thing. So can you tell us a bit more about your PhD, and why did you choose this particular topic, and how that sort of fits into the general research trends of archeomusicology and
Right.
musicology in general?
So I started with, well, my master's, I started with analyzing the music theory tablets. So those are kind of the tablets that inform us about, you can't really call them music theory tablets because they're not a music treatises. They're not these very extensive documents. It's just very short descriptions of like how the strings were ordered on an instrument, and kind of some tuning references, and some like some tablets are referring to like string numbers also. And then now for my PhD, I'm going to focus a little bit more on the notation tablets. So the theory tablets kind of inform us on how to interpret the notation tablets. But one of the problems that I've seen is it's very, like a lot of the interpretations, it's very Western orientated. So they interpret it into like a Western music kind of frame. And because we're talking about ancient music, it's a very challenging thing there, because a lot of the articles that you'll find as well, they won't really say it. They'll say it in a very subtle way, but kind of like, I don't know if you've seen around like, oh, this is what the oldest melody sounds like in the world or something like that. You'll always see those. And then there's a big problem with how it's being translated. So in the Western frame, so that's kind of going into my PhD. So kind of challenging that Western frame and interpreting it into a more direct way. So when on one of the tablets, we can see it's referring to certain strings, like string numbers, to rather translate that as kind of a tablature as well. That makes a little bit more sense. And also a tablature is not necessarily just a Western orientated. We get tablatures in China, it's the ancient Chinese tablatures for the shakuhachi, bamboo flutes. And yeah, so it's not just isolated. So yeah, so like that's the problem with the Western notation, I think. It's just pushing a Western frame onto an ancient culture that is inspired Western ideas, but you can't necessarily take that, like our modern Western ideas now, and try and force it back onto it.
Yeah, I mean that's really interesting, because I have a couple of friends who are actually from India, and who have mentioned this before, this understanding of music from a Western lens, when actually well, we have actually some pretty good evidence to suggest that some of the best developments in music and musicology actually came from the East, and the Middle East
Oh, yes.
particularly, and the Indian subcontinent. So it's really cool that you're trying to sort of actually highlight the fact that, well, this is the current narrative, but that doesn't represent the reality of events. But I think it's something that a lot of people actually need to know more about, because, we have this horrible mentality, I think, in Western Europe particularly, to sort of start thinking about music and classical music, but only from like the Middle Ages onwards, Kyrie eleison,
Oh,
monastic
yes.
chanting, and whatnot. And then suddenly you kind of look just 400 years back, and you go like, what about Sassanid Persia?
Oh,
Or,
yes.
even farther back. And it raises a lot of questions, because it's a completely different world, and it kind of feels like it's a bit of a minefield. And I always wonder, and particularly from your perspective, I would love to know, is there, what are the barriers for people who could potentially want to get into this field to properly do so? Are there language barriers? Are there cultural barriers in any way, shape, or form? Like, what are the biggest challenges for people mostly in the West to kind of dig into this?
Yeah, so one of the things that I've picked up on, so with because you have to have very good assyriology knowledge, and I'm still building mine up because I started with musicology. So sometimes some of the arguments are when you're an assyriologist trying to study these tablets, then you need to have some type of musicology background as well. And it's very difficult to find a musicologist who's also an archaeologist. There are some as well, but yeah, so that's one of the things, because then you have to study your ancient languages. And the one thing with Assyriology as well is a lot of the texts are in German and in French. So you need to, like a lot of the seminal texts, so you need to learn German. Well, you can use Google Translate, I guess, but you're going to miss a lot of some of the nuances of the languages. So yeah, so it's a difficult field to get into that I'm still building my way up, because my next challenge now is, because I've got my musicology background quite strong now, and it's the Assyriology and the philology, so the study of ancient languages or just study of languages. So that needs to be built up more. So it's quite a long journey, but yeah, it's very important for people to know they want to go into this. Like, you can start off with your Assyriology and then move over into music, because, well, the way that I see it as well, because when you study musicology, it's very Western orientated still, actually. So it might be better if you go into Assyriology first, and then you try and avoid the Western music frame. It's still important, though, to have the Western music kind of a knowledge and background, but you'll avoid a lot more of the traps if you go Assyriology first, and then then you have to learn instruments, and that takes a while to So I mean, because you can't study music without actually playing something. So yeah, I guess
Well,
it's very complicated.
This is what I was going to say, because I mean, what was first, the chicken or the egg kind of situation, right? Because I mean, I I'm terrible at playing anything, but I know music. At least I have a basic knowledge of music. So if I have a tablature or a partiture in front of me, I can at least understand what's happening. So of course you can't go into doing anything, like if you have that basic knowledge missing, like I take it's a no. You can't really progress any farther than that. But then of course, like what you were saying in terms of the assyriology, then particularly for people in the West, I think that's quite a difficult subject to get into, because it's quite foreign to us, because it's not really promoted in most classics curriculum and whatnot. We're very, very much focused on Greeks, Romans, and that type of people. Like, even just thinking about the Phoenicians, which were actually not that far away, just seems to be like a whole world apart. So that Western idea can be, hard as well. But out of all of those, like, which one do you think is, perhaps, just purely out of curiosity, the one that is easier to remedy? Like, what is the knowledge that is best you come to directly with, and then the bits that you can learn in, like, from your own perspective? Was it harder to learn the languages? Would that have been harder to have to learn music up from scratch? What was in there for you personally, the bigger challenge?
Yeah, mine is definitely the music came easier, and then the learning the nuances of how cuneiform, your Akkadian and your Sumerian, how it works, because that's a little bit more challenging, I think. So I guess if you want to, well, it depends on the person, I think, as well, because then if you're naturally okay with music, or you have an ear, or, well, even if you don't, you can learn it. It depends. So it depends on the person. It's a very complicated thing, actually. So I guess maybe starting with the music, especially if you want to go into ancient music, maybe you can start with the music, and then you can build your way up to the ancient studies first. So you can go from music and into just studying ancient studies broadly, kind of, and then maybe finding something a little bit more in detail into Assyriology. So I think that's what a lot of other people are doing that I know that are in this field. They started with music, and then they went full on into the Assyriology.
I mean, that makes sense to me. And I think it's a very similar journey from a few people that I know closer to my field that do recreation of medieval music. Not necessarily monastic medieval music, but that we would consider, popular or everyday
Right.
music. They were always musicians first, and
Yeah.
then develop that sort of historical and archaeological background, which is, something that I think you need to have a bit of a passion for, right? Because it's very different, playing electric guitar or anything like that. And suddenly it's like, yeah, I'm totally gonna be learning how a three-string fiddle was made, and why we made those noises, and how we've made
Oh,
that
yes.
fiddle evolve into a guitar, and whatnot. It seems like an interesting way of doing the journey backwards, but then at the same time, I guess it helps you solidify some of the ideas of how music has developed and how human history has gone forward. But it's something that I always say for people, and I think people are finally starting, to wake up to the idea that history is actually a conduit more than anything else. It's like you can be a historian and know a lot of history, but then it could be more difficult for you to branch off onto other things. It's always easier to be a historian and something else because it
Oh,
actually
yes.
opens up a lot of doors. So if you come from any other disciplines, history actually enhances everything else that you've already learned. Like this is why I always say it's, at least in the UK and in a lot of other educational systems, it's always a very helpful degree to have because it kind of prepares your mind and research methodology and whatnot for other fields. But you always need to think of what's you know what's next, what's
Oh,
the
yes.
link with other
Yeah, yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it also
that's,
helps you think more critically, as you said. Yeah.
yeah, it's definitely, I think it's definitely one that people are finally now starting to see as a useful tool. Now, in terms of the actual texts that you're dealing with, if we can we even call them texts?
Oh my
Tablets
God.
texts.
Yeah, the tablet.
I guess like, obviously Assyrian artifacts in general are, I know that they are super, super important for us just overall to understand the development of mankind. But how important in the general scheme of things of these texts, tablets, whatever, are the specific ones that you're looking at that contain music? Like how important was that music for that society? And why do we even have these tablets coming to us? Like, were they safe for a specific occasion? Were they a crucial part of society? What's the process there?
Yeah, that's a very complicated thing to answer also because a lot of these tablets, they were like not all known. Like at one time was like a little bit was discovered here about, oh, this is maybe, well, it wasn't even known that it was related to music. It just looked like these funny terms. And
Mm-hmm.
then slowly but surely they all started to build up. But some of them were excavated. So the notation tablets were excavated at the entrance of a royal palace at
Oh,
Ur, no, at Ayucharit. And so there's one debate is where did they act as displays? So kind of showing off like, oh, this is like our mastery of the music kind of thing, or was it like a catalog of like this is like if you forget a song or something, you can just quickly go to the library of tablets and you can try and work something out where you can try and see it off of there and kind of remember it or just be reminded of this whole catalog of things. So those are those tablets. But now with the theory tablets as well, so the one comes from the Nabni to the creation, like a whole series of texts. So they deal with like parts of the human body and like different types of singing and different types of animals and animal parts. So it was like a whole list, well, the lexical list. So with the Sumerian and the Akkadian, so kind of showing like, well, they also then recorded how it was recorded before. So when the Sumerians, they started recording it, and then the Akkadians, they're busy recording it as well. So just like doing their lexical lists as well. And that then we have one random music one that just talks about the construction of an instrument, kind of. And then we have the thinner strings on the one side and the longer, more bass strings on the other side, or the thinner, smaller strings at the front, kind of at the back. So it's the whole construction of it. And then there's other tablets where we found duplicates as well. So the one tablet is a module. It kind of tells you if your instrument. So for that one, it's the consensus is it's either a horizontal harp, no, the horizontal lyre or vertical lyre. And when you play one string and then you play another one, so it gives you your certain kind of your interval, if you want to think in Western. When you play those two strings, it's going to sound a little bit unclear, and then you would have to tighten the one to make it sound clear, and it kind of cycles through a list, so you can kind of work out the different tunings. But yeah, there's also kind of a problem there of how accurately we can actually decipher that also. So it's all of these that came in bits and pieces that then slowly started to inform one another. So it's very difficult to say like what the purpose kind of was also of some of these texts. Just some of them are more just recording texts, but also we have the royal burials at Ur that have the instruments actually there. So in the Great Death Pit, as also we have the instrument remains there, and there's also debates there where the funerary processions for Queen Puabi. Well, was it? Well, they've changed the consensus now a little bit, but it was always a thing of like it was like a mass performance and a mass gathering, like a funerary a banquet, and then they were bludgeoned to death as they were performing. That I think that's the more recent one. Well, not as they were performing, because there's also this is also where it gets complicated, because that's what the original excavator said about it, and it changed because they found other tablets as well that kind of talk about the funerary practices as well, of like taking the bodies kind of elsewhere that are to be buried with the queens or the royals, so kind of preparing them and then bringing them later on. So it was kind of like also maybe they weren't performing live in the burial thing, there were maybe musicians performing outside the Great Death Pit, and then the bodies kind of sat up or put in neat rows and stuff like that. So it's the evidence is kind of all over the place, and you have to hypothesize a little bit, because every now and then something comes up that informs us a little bit more of, oh, maybe it actually worked like this. Yeah.
That sounds like a huge puzzle. Like I'm just listening to you being like, well, we need to grab a little bit from here, a little bit of there, and I mean but that's a common problem, you think, either in musicology when we're not looking at Western culture, or is it a problem because it's assyriology and therefore everything is sort of scattered, or is it both?
I think it's just the ancient world a little bit. Things are a little bit more scattered. Well, with a little bit more with the ancient world, it's a little bit all over the place, and we kind of have to slowly but surely work towards it, because there's also a lot of the cuneiform tablets that haven't been deciphered yet. So there's other music ones maybe out there, and also there's a problem of, so some of the theory tablets were excavated, not all of them in the same place. There's about 2 in Ur, I think, and then the other one, well, there's a notation tablets in Ugarit, and where's the other one now? But it's also different places, and also different dated to different periods. And because you also have copies of the one, it's an older copy, you have a newer copy, and does that mean that the music like tradition stayed the same? But you can't really assume that, because it could have changed. That's maybe so it's a little bit all over the place.
That sounds like a headache. I mean, I come from finishing a PhD that was very much a headache, but at least I had nice clumps of evidence that made things a little bit easier for me. But I think that's kind of the reason why we're experiencing some problems with the ancient world, and why some people are incredibly fascinated by it, because it's much more a mystery, but also why it can be incredibly frustrating, right? Because at the end of the day, you have to write a PhD about all of this, and how you're gonna make it all make sense. It can be intimidating, I'm sure. So talking more directly about archeomusicology and musicology overall, what are the bits that you are sort of specializing in, and that you are finding that you resonate more with, or that tickle your interest? What are the bits of that part of the process that you think, yeah, that's really rad?
Well, it's kind of seeing the connections between the tablets, because sometimes there are connections. There's related terms that come across as well. But what I find more interesting is because I'm taking kind of a step back, because there has been a lot published on this as well, and a lot of the connections have already been found. I'm taking a step back, kind of going like, because with the notation tablets, are we really able to translate them the way that we're busy doing? Or to, so that's kind of a little bit nicer. It makes things a little bit more complicated, because I can kind of see like, okay, we have these related tablets, but then we have this problem and this problem and this problem. Maybe they aren't really problems. Maybe it's just me that needs to do a little bit deeper research as well with them. But again, just trying to, like you spoke about playing from tablature as well. If you know the song very well, you can immediately kind of get it from the tablature easily. But if it's a song that you don't know very well, so if I give you a tablature of something that I know very well and you have to go learn it, you're not going to play it as exactly, because sometimes the rhythms might be a little bit different or something like that. So it's the same thing with those ancient notation tablets. And that's the thing that I find most interesting. And that's the thing that I'm obsessed with, I think. Just, it started with me just wanting to know how these tablets work and how can they say, like, this is what this tablet is showing, or this is what this tablet is showing. And it's just, how did they get from that point A to that point B and then to point C? And then I just realized I just want to know what each tablet just says on its own. Like, what does it say? Why is it important? How does it help us? And just like slowly building up like that. So that's one of the things that interests me the most. Like just looking at each one isolated and step by step. So starting with the theory tablets, well, I call them the theory tablets sometimes. Yeah, it's sometimes just like brief inscriptions, not really like hardcore theory or anything like that. Well, maybe for the one tablet, I have a replica here of the one. So this is one of the, can you see it nice? Is my lighting a bit weird? So it's a replica of one of the ones. And then this is the more complicated one. This would be the more theoretical one, because this is the one that cycles through all the different tunings that you can get. Well, when I say tunings, it's just talking about clearing the strings and having the instrument in a certain, like when you've tuned it, the instrument is in, and then like the specific term kind of a thing. Yeah, so that's just the more interesting thing for me, is looking at each one isolated and trying to make it more accessible. So if I show you this tablet as well, so I have a sketch of it. I'm going to do it from the screen. We're going to go this way. So can you see that kind of?
That's really neat.
So, yeah, this is a sketch of one of them. And this is the nicer one, because it's not too complicated. So here's the transliterations for it. And what's happening is, so this is your the Sumerian, and there's your Akkadian. So it's recording the same information. And over here it's just showing you, so string 1, so we have the string front, the string next, and then we have string 3, string 4, so we can see the number indications I'll show you just now. And then the middle 5th string, and then string 4 from the back, and then string 3 from the back, string 2 from the back, and string 1 from the back. And then we have these indications here. So for this one specifically, it's string 3, and then the string is small. So it's a smaller, so it's a higher tension string as well. So if you look over here with the cuneiform, just the number indications, you can see quite nicely the 3 and the 4. So that's the more interesting thing for me, actually studying these tablets more in detail and building my like assyriology knowledge around these. So kind of using these to help me practice my assyriology skills. And it's not too difficult things. It's quite easy to actually just build up from it. Yeah.
I mean, that's really cool. If nothing else, it looks really cool. I mean, if we're going with rule of cool, for sure, this is awesome. But you know, the more that I'm sort of thinking about this, and the more you talk about it, and I was just even thinking, you know, before I was starting to look into this a bit more, it's like, is there? I mean, how much of a practical element do you need to apply to understand these things? Because of course, with music, there is a difference between seeing it and understanding what is happening and actually making it happen. And like, do you have to do that? Is there a moment when you actually have to sit down and be like, okay, this is very good in practice, but would this have actually translated? Would this have actually taught me how to play something? And if so, like, how do you even get started to do that? Like, I
Yeah,
take
so
it you cannot do it with modern instruments, so do you have to then recreate an ancient instrument? Like, what does that imply?
yeah, so they are busy working with that. So with that tuning tablet as well, because we have the archaeological remains of some of um, the ancient harps and the lyres.
Cool.
Well, yours, yeah, that should be your harp
Mm-hmm.
because your strings are your different lengths. So you can kind of see you would have the shorter string and a lot. I don't know if you can see the string very nicely, and we have
Yeah.
then so these ones excavated. But the problem with well, so yeah, you can play around with the replicas, but the problem is a lot of the strings weren't there when they were excavated, and some of them had to be molded out as well. So you can't really. So that's the thing also with these interpretations of the notation tablets is you kind of have to choose an octave register that you want, and then you kind of plant your information into there. But it can be any other octaves. Well, you can kind of try and see what would be the breaking points of the strings, but you have to try and go figure out what were the strings made of. And there are some tablets that do talk about the like how some instruments were made, or like strings like of cat gut or well sheep gut, and yeah, just kind of playing around with what would the breaking points would have been. But that's very hypothetical still, trying to play around with the instruments. But there is a lot of good work happening there with the tuning tablets and trying to play around with it. But then you kind of have to assume some Western knowledge, and it is kind of like one of the things. It's very eerie how it does seem like there's a very strong relation to just our Western knowledge as well, kind of like especially with the tuning tablet. But then it's the thing of, is it a problem? Like, are we translating it? Like, is it a problem in translation that we're applying? Because if I'm going to analyze something from a Western perspective, then it says more about me as an analyst. So
Yeah.
if you're going to have, so if I'm going to analyze a Mozart piece or something using my Western knowledge that I've practiced in and that I've learned, versus let's say someone that's studied classical Indian music and they analyze the same piece, they're going to see it differently. So I'm going to see the tonal, the functional harmony, your tonics, your dominants, and all those things, and they might see other things and wonder about like a microtonal inflections and all those things. So it's you can play around with the instruments and the reconstructions as well, but I think it can only get you kind of so far, not
Yeah.
too far.
No, that's good because this is always one of the things that I wonder. I mean, I'm clumsy as hell with my hands, so my future as an archaeologist was very very short lived, and I was like, there's no way I'm going into conservation. I should not be allowed nearby these things. But you know, when we're talking about stuff like this, and we try to see it as well in things like art, we try to then recreate and understand the things that we've been given through the period of time, however long it may have been, by then trying to recreate it, usually through either experimental archaeology or things like that, to kind of try to understand why we would have recorded them, how we would have reached that, stage and whatnot. And that's the thing. You are always doing it from this bias, which is
Oh yeah,
something unfortunately you can't remove, and
yeah,
it's
it's
something that
difficult to
really
get out
bothers
of.
me.
Yeah,
It's
like
it, it
like
bothers me a
it's
lot
so easy to
because
fall into the traps. Yeah, to get stuck
exactly.
and into.
And it's something, that they always tell you when you're doing history, when you're doing archaeology, or, you need to be 100% unbiased. You need to remove all bias. And but it's not possible. I'm sorry. You're always going to be a human being
But you're
from a
gonna see
specific
something.
background with experiences in life. As much as you may want to keep them at bay, you're still influenced by what's happened to you. So, to what extent that is pure and that is real, or is just, I mean, not necessarily just your imagination, but of course, interpretation, is your interpretation. And that's
Oh yeah,
that's always something that fascinates me, particularly when we talk about abstract things like music or particularly the ancient world. We can never say it's a faithful reproduction or anything like that, right? We
yeah,
always have to be very careful because it's always the perspective of this is as good as we can get right now with the information that we
yeah,
have.
available. Yeah, yes.
So it's like, is that frustrating? Like, do you ever find yourself sort of thinking, but will I ever know? Like, is that something that actually chips away and that makes the research harder? Because I can see how if you're sort of feeling like I'm just kind of like clutching at straws, I'm just sort of talking hypotheticals here. How far can hypotheticals take us to really understand something? Do you think that process sometimes has damaged more this field, or maybe create some further stereotypes, whether it's from a Western perspective or whatever, than it's helped? Or do you think that the hypotheticals still hold some value for what people like you do?
I think it's helped a little bit, like, because I've also done some of those mistakes, or like, especially with some of the theories, like you kind of follow the one for a while and then you see, oh wait, this one, there's a different interpretation. And that's why they're called interpretations as well, because it's a interpretation. But then so you get kind of stuck into, and you see, but then you kind of, it kind of helps you see, oh wait, there's a different perspective. And then luckily for me, I've kind of seen a third perspective, kind of, because one thing that you talked about now with the artistic relations, so the artistic recreations also. So one of the ones you can see, this image is a quite highly debated one, or it was as well. So with one of the theory tablets, it talks about you play like for a certain term. So this term would be found on the notation tablet. And then we have this other tablet that tells us which strings does that term refer to. So term X would be, you would play string 1 and 5 or something. But then are you playing 1 and 5 at the same time? Or are you playing string 1 all the way to 5? If you're on a harp, you can play from string 1, like almost like a small scale kind of idea. So playing from string 1 to 5, or playing them together. So over here, with this artistic recreation over here, you can see it's animals that are playing it. So the
Yeah.
animals are playing like an animal, a bull-headed type of lyra there. And then are they playing with two hands? Are they playing strings at the same time? Or are they playing it one after the other? And we can see also over here. So it's a thing of like, so you can see so that first interpretation where it was thought that it's played the one, and then
I don't know if it's my internet or something. I think we've lost you there for about a second.
connection. Yeah, I think that was my connection. Sorry.
That's all right. No
So
worries.
that very first interpretation was more an assyriologist. She was a student, and then she was given a tablet by one of her professors, and just he just said, go try translate it as like a study, as a practice. And that was back in the day, well, in the 1960s, a little bit before that also, where you could actually like play around with the tablets a little bit, one actually have them in your hand and go, because like it's a little bit more structured now and a little bit more better system in place. And then because she played a little bit of piano as well, she instantaneously thought of intervals, because that's the first thing kind of you learn, scales, intervals. It's right, and you're not really thinking like, oh, Arabic music, if you're playing on an ode, it doesn't have frets and you have those microtonal notes in between it, so you're going to think kind of more intervals. And like if you think about maqams, and like in Arabic music, it's not interval based, it's more kind of not really scales, but a few notes, like little sections that you kind of piece together that you can use to improvise. So she was thinking more in terms of the intervals. So you would play the one string and then the other one, and then that would later progress. So now one of the other theories is you play from string 1 to 5. But the interesting with that tablet that I've seen, just taking a step back, going like I want to try and include both interpretations. So to recognize the one and the other one, and not kind of disprove the one or the other. But by just taking a step back, I've noticed on the tablet, and this has been published as well a lot of times, but it hasn't been explicitly said too many times, where on the tablet, there is a certain indication that implies and, so one and the next string, so string 1 and string 5. But there's two numbering systems. So on the one side, you have where you have the and indication, and on the other side, you just have kind of different terms, which could imply they could use either or. They could use an ascending one or a descending one, or whichever one. And that's why with just interpreting the tablet as is, those notation tablets, without giving all of the Western notation interpretations or the notes kind of scribbled in, you can just have a picture of the tablet saying, oh, this term is string this one to this one, or string this one and this one. And you can kind of decide as the reader which one do you interpret it as? And you don't have to kind of force the reader into, this is my interpretation or this is that one, to kind of try and leave it open.
I mean, that just that just blew my mind. But I think, you know, even not having any particular knowledge on the subject, and just purely from, you know, my basic understanding of music and music theory and just what music is, to me that makes sense. Like, music is not supposed to be a rigid, regulated thing that we've made it. And if you look into music, particularly, well, I'm out of the Eastern music that I'm familiar with is mostly Chinese music from the roughly late ancient period to the medieval period, which we can't really divide Chinese history like that. But, you know, for a Western audience, that's what we will call it. And it's that idea that, you know, you have all of the elements, but at the end of the day, when you're playing music, and that's the reason why in Spanish, we normally not just say that you are reading a tablature, but that you are interpreting.
Oh, yes, yeah, because there's a lot of interpretation that you need to put in there. Yeah.
So I think that flexibility, that fluidity, that sort of suggestion of, you know, these are the options that you have, and then you do it whatever way you want. To me, that makes sense, because you wouldn't create, I mean, you know, you wouldn't really create music to just be played A, B, C equals D, and this is how the flow is gonna go. Because at the end of the day, you know, particularly in pre-modern society, music had so many different contexts where we used it in life. You know, you could have ritualistic connotations, it could have day-to-day connotations. The same piece of music could be used but played slightly different depending on the occasion. You know, you may have the same melody for a wedding, but you may play it with a twist for a funeral. So how do we make these transitions? Well, it's all about context, and it's all about, you know, those social cues that obviously we are missing because we are not there.
Definitely.
But that are so important, and it's cool that, you know, you are actually allowing yourself to think, well, actually, hold on, why not? Because I think it's, you know, when we're always in doubt, and I used to say this a lot when I was doing my PhD, you know, not having conclusive evidence that something may or may not have been means we don't have conclusive evidence. So we cannot just discard that it was one way or the other. And actually, by rejecting this evidence, we are hurting ourselves, because we're closing doors that we may have to open again in the future. So I think that's a really cool part of what you're doing. The fact that you almost have to reopen a lot of those doors to then potentially, I don't know, 5 years down the line, be like, ooh, look at what we found. That's really cool. But I guess that also means that, I mean, has the way you have sort of gone into archeomusicology changed the way you understand modern music? Like, has that had like a backlash effect and sort of affect your own understanding of musicology in the present? Like, how does that journey translate?
Yeah, definitely. Like, it's like it started also with the different tuning systems as well, just seeing the differences actually thinking about more, because we've always heard about there's a different tuning systems, and so like C sharp is the same as D flat for like now in modern music, but in Renaissance music as well, it was a little bit different. And medieval different tunings, your just intonation and your Pythagorean tuning as well. It's a lot different. So you can also like just how the ancients kind of perceived music as well. It's going to be a little bit different to how kind of we're going to interpret now. So it's just that of just appreciating it a little bit more, and the different tuning systems, and just seeing how just seeing the confusion happen. The same thing with if you think about the harmonic series, when you have a perfect fourth and a perfect fifth, it's technically the same, because you have C to G, so C, D, E, F, G, your fifth. But then you have you have F, G, A, B, C, your fourth. And they're kind of intertwined there in the harmonic series. And there's all these little confusions where it's like you have so many possibilities actually that you can play around with. because this is one of the things that also comes across on the ancient tablets as well. It seems like they're only using like intervals of fourths. Like sometimes it's like from string 1 to string 4, or string 1 to 5, or even if it's like from string 7 to 2, it's also a fifth. But then you see like a third prop up there. And it's like, is it a major third? Is it a minor third? And it's just all that confusion that kind of comes in. But it's fun, that confusion, I think, of just understanding music a bit better, because then I also teach a music theory as well. So then I have to teach them more Western stuff. And it's like I have this ancient stuff in the back. And then I'm seeing like, oh, but it's quite nice how it works out and the systems we've developed up until now. And then it's just funny seeing all the confusions that also had to lead up to this point of us just going like, okay, no, let's just stick to A equals 444. Let's use this system. And then, yeah, it's quite interesting. Just seeing the connections and seeing the disconnect as well, yeah.
I mean, that sounds, I love how you just embrace the madness in that sense. But I guess, you know, particularly from where you're departing, you have to have a very open mind, because anything could happen, right? But
yeah.
Is that scary? Like, from a research perspective, is that openness that you need to have particularly scary? Because I know, at least from when I stand and what I've seen, is a lot of people are concerned that the madness will take over the method, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like, how do you handle that? How do you find the balance in the force? I don't have a better reference, but it kind of feels a bit like, you know, you at some point, you need to draw a line, right? I guess you need to say, okay, this is as far as I can allow this confusion to take over the evidence, the research, or the interpretation itself. So I'm just thinking, you know, particularly with something as creative and as open to interpretation as music, is that hard to do? Is that something that actually influences the research sometimes, and that makes you change arguments or line of thoughts? Like, how does that interact?
Yeah, it's a very complicated thing, because sometimes it's like you think you're on the right track, and then you've kind of read more, and then you start thinking like, oh no, but wait, is it actually like this? Am I wrong? Like, am I being too open? And then it's like, oh, but this does make sense, kind of, or this seems to work. Like, especially like now when I said, like, when you're teaching it as well, then you can see like the connections as well. But then it's like, is there really that connection that you can follow through from the ancient world all the way? Like, can you really follow that kind of, because there's also the disconnect between ancient Greek music and is there a disconnect there as well, type of a thing. Yeah, so it's just, the openness is kind of scary, I think, as well. But I think it's also useful in a way, because there's this also one thing to try and make it a little bit more accessible for people that are not specialists in the field. Like, I think a lot of the specialists in the field are gonna get annoyed at me maybe, because it's stuff that they already know, kind of, because they already know how the tablet works.
Yeah.
They already know that this term is this string to this string, or string 1 and string 5, or something like that. So they already know how it works, but it's very difficult to find that published somewhere as like a graphic, a representation, like a drawing, like a sketch with the transliterations actually on it. Because if you read a lot of the assyriological stuff, it's a little bit complicated sometimes, because especially the older, like from the 1960s as well, because they weren't really going to waste ink also putting the sketches there. Sometimes they would have the sketch, but they're not going to like erase the stuff and start adding the transliterations there. You have to know what specific sign is what transliteration as well. So to kind of make that a little bit more accessible as well, that's one of my goals. That makes the openness a little bit less scary, I think, because I have a goal in mind to make it very directly, like, so you can see that, okay, this is a notation tablet, there's the kind of the lyrics that almost gives us the context, but it's a little bit difficult to decipher, and then underneath that, this is what these specific terms, so you can, at the push of a button, kind of translate it and see, okay, this is how that works. And then so does that kind of answer your question a little bit?
Yeah, it does perfectly. I think it's wonderful. It just kind of like, yeah, no, it is one of those things that I've seen in my own research, when you're sort of so deep into it, and it you kind of have to start to make that division between, okay, no, what's maybe
Oh
maybe
yes.
maybe that was a bit too far, what
No,
it's like.
yes.
But at least, from my point of view of a bit more traditional history, then you have something tangential to go, by. You can sort of say, okay, this is where I draw the line.
Oh
But
yes.
it is definitely interesting, and I genuinely, I'm really really excited to see what you actually end up coming up with, and what the next steps are, because I think they're gonna be really really, informative, not just for all of those people that normally wouldn't have access to this subject, but I always say any type of revision of how we do things and how we analyze things throughout the humanities science in general, it's always given us another door in, another way in, and a different point of view that is always useful. So I think from that perspective, they can get as mad
Oh
as they
yes.
want with you. They will realize years on now, actually, that other viewpoint was needed, because it will either help consolidate the information that was already there, or challenge it, but from a platform that will actually allow that to be done, from a methodological way. So
Yeah,
that's,
because the whole sorry.
no, no, go.
The whole digitization thing is also
Yeah.
becoming a very big trend, like taking better, higher quality photographs of the tablets and using special lighting techniques to actually see because yeah, there's one thing trying to translate it off a picture and a sketch and actually seeing the actual tablet and actually being able to then see, and also like they're looking at the replica is not going to do much justice as well, because that's sometimes based off of a sketch or yeah, or a photograph, and it's yeah, so but one of the things as well with like you said, with where do you kind of draw the line as well, or like with the openness as well. I think one of the fun things is just making the mistakes and then being corrected, kind of a thing. It's frustrating in the moment, or kind of figuring it out yourself, like making those mistakes and then learning from it. So now looking back, like all the mistakes that I've made and all the weird mistakes that I've made, just I'm still probably going to make more, but that's the fun part, and that's what the openness brings. I think just you can play around a little bit more instead of being yeah too stuck in one way, kind of, or yeah trying to prove something, and rather trying to prove, well, not trying to prove, just trying to yeah, like I said, take a step back and just look at it from a more isolated perspective as well. Yeah, because that's one of the other things as well. We can see a lot of cultural ties. So we can see, like with the trade in the ancient world, we can see all these links sometimes. But with the music as well, what influenced it? How do we know what influenced it? What didn't influence it? Like, it's better to kind of keep it isolated. So not to compare it to ancient Greek music, even though there could be a relation, or even related to the ancient Indian music or ancient Chinese music, because it's all in the same region and there is trade routes as well. So it's a thing of like, how can you be sure how was the music influenced?
Yeah.
And to just look at that isolated. So like this was that culture's music at that point in time. We can kind of guess that these could have been cultural influences, but let's just look at what they did isolated and what that kind of shows. Yeah.
That's cool, because as a cultural historian, I just think, oh my God, all of the possibilities, right? This is a beautiful melting pot. I just need to like dissect into it and pull it all apart. But yes, at the same time, you also need to be able to isolate them, and understand them for what they are and what they contribute to the melting pot, because otherwise you are just looking at bits that don't actually make sense and conjoin together. But that's
Oh
that's
yes.
really that's really insightful. That really makes a lot of sense. And that's, yeah, it's really cool. It actually really makes me want to study music more, which is probably something I
Oh,
shouldn't
cool.
do. I've gone into so many different aspects of culture already that I should probably draw the line somewhere. But I'm also becoming very aware that we're actually running out of time. But this has
Oh
been such
yes,
a
I'm sorry.
fascinating subject. It always happens. But okay, just because we have literally like a couple of minutes to go, and just sort of to round things up, is there any word of advice, or anything that I don't know, imagine there is a future mini you somewhere out there in the world that will see this. Something that you wish you would have known when you actually started studying this type of subject. Whether as a, warning or the opposite, as a sort of friendly eye opener. Anything out there that you think, for all of those people that you're trying to make the field more accessible to, that may help them either connect with this or realize this is definitely not for them and to back off and find something else.
So find like I think this field is open, so go for it. Try play around with it. Oh well, yeah. Some might say it's closed as well, but you can go play around still and try and see if you can figure something out. But yeah, that's try find an assyriologist and a musicologist, someone kind of also working in the field of ancient music as well. They're quite easy to contact and get a hold of, and try get their advice as well. So some of them would recommend looking into your university, how strong is your assyriology department, because it depends on where you are in the world as well, because you might have to go overseas to do that, and that's a bit difficult and challenging as well. But yeah, try find someone that can help you along the way, that can kind of say, like, that can let you make your mistakes, and that's not going to be too harsh on you, and that will then help you correct kind of those mistakes slowly but surely. You know, that's one of the things I think. And well, I guess also just like have fun with the topic. Like try, like don't stress yourself out. There's a lot of music theory tablets probably out there still that we haven't deciphered, and maybe you'll be lucky and decipher one, but it's just based on luck. You're not gonna, it's not like I've tried as well, trying to look at the digital library of the cuneiform tablets, going through trying to see if I can find anything to do with music, and it's somewhere there. Maybe you'll be lucky. Just play around, I guess. Yeah, it's a very interesting field, very weird one to get into.
No, that's really wonderful advice. I feel like, particularly in this world and age, and considering how the field of the humanities is going overall, having that sort of friendly mentor-like figure, or just someone that you can sort of lean onto, is useful. Not just because it will help you feel a bit less isolated in the world, and definitely will make things a bit more, easy to get into, but just because we all always need a reasonable sounding board, and they are hard to find. Let's face it, they are hard to find. So, if in this field at least they are quite easy to reach, and there is a good type of community there, then that's an amazing bonus. So, anyone that's watching this, please do make use of this resource, because you will not be so lucky in all fields. Some of us are fighting really hard to actually make this happen. So, this is a positive, and you should definitely embrace it. And yeah, the more that you say it, I think the luck element, particularly for people that may be approaching this from an archaeology background, I think a lot of archaeologists in potence sort of sometimes a bit get caught up with like being the next Indiana Jones, you know what I mean? And trying to find something cool.
Because a lot of them have been, well, we can say some of them have been found, with impressive ones, but probably maybe more out there. But yeah, that's the thing. Are you gonna be lucky?
Exactly. And we are not trying to like deter you, but there is a certain amount of luck. It's simple as we don't know what is gonna come out of the next burial pit, the next thing that we find. It's literally just a flip of a coin.
Yes, and a lot of them are also quite difficult to get to now these days as well, because back in the 1800s, 1900s, it was quite easy. Now there's so many, like the governments are like, no, sorry, we don't want you here. This is for like our people to excavate. Like with the like in Egypt as well, they prefer now. They don't really like Westerners coming in there they prefer their locals to do it. Maybe they'll get people in to come out, but it's very difficult. It's very kind of blocked off now, because it's quite interesting. That's also an interesting topic. Like,
that reminds me of something we were speaking with a couple of weeks ago with Maddie, the archaeologist teacup, about there are some areas in the world where the locals are actually really being encouraged to work with their cultural heritage, and that's great. But there is also some places in the world where this is not possible. So then we need to take people to work
Yeah.
there, and where do we find the balance, and where is it good to have stricter rules or lesser rules or whatever. Then these are things that are definitely going to be shaping a lot of archaeological fields, particularly as time goes on, particularly as we become more aware of things like environmental change, pandemics, and things like that. These things actually inform science and archaeological procedures and history as well. So it can be hard to get to those places where you may be able to be in contact with the culture or the artifact that you want to study, which is the reason why the matter of accessibility is now, and digitization is so important. But don't let this discourage you. It's more than anything, I guess, a forewarning, just so you don't go into this thing completely unawares. Because unfortunately, a lot of people go into it thinking, oh, it's just as simple as I grab a plane, I turn there, and it's not like that. And it's
like
not.
a lot of sorry, like a lot of the tablets that they're on photographs of them. There's about 68 fragments of them, of the notation tablets. There's only one photograph of one of the most widely published one, and the rest are just like, it's like one page that's been published in 1968. So black and white photograph of just some of them. And it's like, I want to try go get the photographs or update it and actually go look at the tablets as well. But it's in the Museum of Damascus. So getting in there as well is gonna,
Yeah.
So
Yeah, this is the problem, modern day history doesn't necessarily agree with the way the ancient world was. So another thing to keep in mind, but don't let it deter you. Just simply, be well informed and make sure that you are always following the best practice as well, because this is also about archaeological and historical practice, which is something that is often overlooked. And there is a reason why we have these guidelines, there's a reason why we have these procedures, because there is ethics
a lot of those
involved.
mistakes have been made.
Yeah, we don't want to end up with fighting over patrimony again, for expropriating property from other cultures. We don't want to have to deal with ethical issues, etc., etc. So particularly relevant for the ancient world, if you're going to be studying it outside of your actual geographical region, definitely something that you really need to consider, because it's not easy. And I mean, we're talking about something as a tablet, which may seem approachable, but if then we're getting into things like archaeological remains that actually have biological materials, such as bones or anything that has to do with zoology and whatnot, then you also have to bring that element into it, and it can make things a little bit more difficult. So for any future historians and archaeologists out there, just be aware that your passion is great, but make sure that you inform your passion with some actual research before you actually jump into it. Because otherwise, Dylan may have to go and grab you from somewhere, that you may not want to go to, and this could make things really, really hard. So don't rely on your mentor to get you out of trouble, essentially.
Yes, definitely.
Well, that's unfortunately all we have time for today, Dylan. But this has been a fascinating talk. For those of you who may have joined in late, I'm literally about to post this onto Instagram so you can see the whole talk on general archeomusicology, music in the ancient world, and musicology in this day and age, and how everything sort of fits together, and why people like Dylan are trying to actually understand this field for our benefit and for the benefit of just the general understanding of the ancient world, which is very, very much needed in this day and age. So that's the end of the show. Thank you so much, Dylan, once again for being here. I would love to have you back for some more talks on music and whatnot, because it's something that we're really, really fond of here. So looking forward to seeing you there. Thanks everyone for keeping an eye on the talk, and for your questions, your contributions, and all of your hearts and flames that I've seen coming through the chat. It's always very encouraging. So that's it. Take care. Have a lovely evening, and we'll catch you soon.
Yes, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much for inviting me as well. Yes, thank you.
My pleasure.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.